Clever
Sure.
bastard.
Well, I don't plan these things, but they just play out that way.
That was really good.
Thank you. And yes, welcome everyone to the spoiler room, another edition of it. So glad you're sticking around for us. Halloween is coming to an end. I am rather sad, but I watch horror films year round. But Halloween is coming to an end, and so we are ending it tonight not with a Hellraiser film, but it is still within a vein, kind of the spirit of the Hellraisers in a number of ways, including there's chains with hooks. Hey, people with very sharp fashion sense, and interesting fashion sense, bit gothic, though more color. And yeah, we're talking about The Cell 2000, starring an ensemble cast of talent, which I forgot who was in here. Um, and with us tonight, of course, as always, is the man who keeps coming back for more. Our friend, Mr. Ian Simmons, is with us once again. Hello, Ian. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm exhausted, but that's probably the perfect mindset to discuss a movie that's ultimately about dreams.
It is. It is about dreams. So yeah, that puts you kind of in the mindset. Just don't fall asleep, because I don't have the Dracula outfit to put you in. Okay, the Dracula armor. I don't have that to put you in. So
That's the first thing I noticed. I did a live stream last Friday
I
on
know, right?
Bram Stoker's Dracula, this Coppola film,
Mhm.
and I'm like, I turned this on today. I'm like, holy shit, that's the same outfit. I w- as Vlad the Impaler wore in the opening of that movie. That they needed to do a crossover, like Gary Oldman would be in the
Ooh.
third slab.
That would definitely be interesting. Oh, and Robert Bond's come down the stairs already. He says it's time to
Woo!
raise the curtain on the horror show tonight. Thank you for the play on the Muppets as we open up and enjoy our favorite beverage, which I have the adult juice box from the winery where my wife works. I know you have the very super mega large cup of coffee, which is very impressive. And yes, this is Tropical Storm. It is pineapple wine, flavored wine. So there you go. But
That sounds awesome.
this is my adult juice box for tonight. Mm. So The Cell, yes, 2000, a 2000 horror film, which is a weird year for horror. Uh, so, Mr. Ian Simmons, if you wouldn't mind, give us a synopsis of The Cell.
It's essentially like the Silence of the Lambs meets Hellraiser meets. I was going to say What Dreams May Come. I think that was just before this came out. But essentially, there is a woman named Catherine Dean who works with. She's specifically working with one boy who's comatose. Essentially, she's trying to break through to him. She works in this super sophisticated institute that specializes in getting into people's heads, literally. So she transports in there. She tries to have conversations with his consciousness because his outside body is completely unresponsive. Um, she kind of fails at that, but turns out the FBI has other uses for the Institute's skills, and hers in particular. When a serial killer, played by Vincent D'Onofrio, starts leaving a trail of bodies who are all drowned horribly, and the bodies are left for the feds to find, made up like grotesque dolls. So there is another person, a lady who's been kidnapped. The Based on the killer's previous record, she's got 40 hours before she is drowned. So the feds raid the guy's place to capture him, to take him alive, but he has some kind of a seizure brought on by a childhood trauma, like a virus, I think, or a nerve disease of some kind. So the only way to reach him, to find out where this person is for Catherine to go into his mind and experience all the horrors therein, cut through the BS, get to him, and try and find the answers. And then there's a neurotic, sort of hot 1990s 2000 era Vince Vaughn, who's playing the other Fed. And one of his, he was going through a period here where he was like not doing the comedic roles like in Swingers that put
Right.
him on the map, but he
Mhm.
was in Gus Van Sant's Psycho. He was in Clay Pigeons, which I didn't see, but I know
Mhm.
that was a drama. So I'd forgotten that he was in this movie, and I forgot how good he is in this movie. It kind of makes me wonder, what if he had just stuck with the dramatic path instead of like Fred Claus?
Yeah, he's an interesting pick, but in here he's trying not to be so Vaughn-y. Vince Vaughn-y,
Right.
right? And this, I think this is one of his like least Vince Vaughn-y type of roles. And if you've seen Vince Vaughn, it's why I didn't exactly care for. Well, there's many reasons why I didn't care for Gus Van Sant's Psycho. I know some of my friends have enjoyed that film, and more power to you. But there are a number of performances of his to where if you look at it, you go, yeah, that's Vince Vaughn being Vince Vaughn. But here he actually isn't. He cuts back on the humor quite a bit. He's taking a more serious role. And at its core, this film reminded me, like you mentioned it, it's kind of like Silence of the Lambs in that, you know, it's almost a crime procedural, but
Mhm.
it's got the horror elements, or Seven even along that lines, to where only here it's a little bit more, surreal because you're dealing with dreams, but at the same time, it's one of those things to where it's a mixture of some genres, and we started to see some of that around the turn of the God, I sound old, around the turn of the century. But it was to where we started to seeing that more gray area of films belonging to a specific genre. I think Silence of the Lambs is really one of the classic examples to win Best Picture. A lot of people consider it a horror film. You tell some people that are like, well, no, it's just a thriller. Well, a thriller horror film, that's always gray. It's also dramatic. It's like, after a while, it was harder to kind of put these in a specific category. And The Cell's definitely one of those where you're thinking, oh, we're doing crime procedural. We got the FBI guys, they're tracking down, they got the the board, they're trying to track, and all of a sudden we cut to Dream Area where shit's just so surreal. You're just like, wow, you know? Or as Owen Wilson say, wow. Um, but I my initial feeling with this when I watched it was this is this is cool. Actually, it's a slick film, I think. How
It
do you
is. I
feel
mean,
about it?
I watched it before today. I'd seen it
Mhm.
once 22 years ago, which makes my arteries harden just thinking about it. Um, I didn't like it the first time I watched it, partially because I'd say mostly because it reminded me too much of Silence of the Lambs. They didn't spend enough time in this dreamscape for me.
Right.
There's way too much of stuff that we've seen in other movies of like, okay, you got
Mhm.
the police caravan going out to the site. You got the SWAT team busting into the
Sure.
nondescript suburban house, and you got the torture dungeon, all this other
Mhm.
stuff. I'm like, yeah. But watching it now, I've got a much better appreciation for it. There's more. I was really tuned into the dream imagery, and I thought it was surreal in a way that very few films capture the dream state properly, because there is an illogic to a lot of the scenery, things, scenes and motifs shifted on a dime. It was really good. I The thing that disturbed me though is it did remind me of. Hmm. It just seemed very much of its time.
Right.
I think there was very much, maybe too much of a focus, and I was conflicted because I'm not sure if this is the director and the screenwriter's intention to exploit or draw critical attention to the idea of the woman in peril,
Oh.
because we've got
Mhm.
so many scenes of women bound up, drowning, being tortured, crying out for their mommy and their daddy. It almost seems fetishistic. And I understand that that is sort of a gateway into the mind of the killer that we're supposed to despise and try and understand. But just from an aesthetic standpoint, I'm like, this is unpleasant to watch. I don't
Mhm.
know if I want to go through the rest of this. But it's also, I think, kind of counterbalanced or balanced by a great performance, I think, by Jennifer Lopez.
Mhm.
Much like Vince Vaughn, she was, Selena had come out a few years before that, kind of put her on the map. She was fantastic in Out of Sight with George Clooney, which came out a couple years before this. And I feel like this movie kind of gets overlooked. She also has moved away from this kind of material in later years, and I think that's a shame.
Yeah, I will say too. This is one of the better performances she puts on. And granted, she's not in front of the camera as much as her later films, but still, it's a good performance by everyone. And you're right. There's parts of it we've seen before, but I think why I think this is a bit underrated is uh, for the other angle that you say is that the dream state. Yeah, I mean, it really feels like you're in a dream world. I know we've gotten it kind of with Freddy, but with Freddy, there was still a little bit more logic and structure with that. And Robert Infobomb does mention about Dreamscape and how it did handle the labyrinth of one's mind rather than entering one's dreams. And you're right. Dreamscape is probably the closest I would say that it handled the feeling of actually being in a dream. But in here, yeah, I give a lot of respect, and why I think it's a bit underrated is the fact that they do take a chance to really get surreal. I mean, at one point, and they at least set it up, but at one point in this film, because Jennifer Lopez's character, Catherine Dean, uh, she decides to take it upon herself because she's just not getting through to the serial killer because he's schizophrenic, and the schizophrenic side is just so strong. She ends up pulling him into her mind, which is dangerous. But before she does that, she looks at his journals and some imagery. You literally get J Lo as like this Virgin Mary type of imagery, and it's just like, and visually, this film, the dream stuff is beautiful. Even the grotesque stuff, the way it's shot is wildly different than the way they shoot the real world stuff on purpose.
Hmm.
But I love the cinematography done for the dream stuff in here. You know,
Yeah, we even have a giant rotating cube as we had in Hellbound Hellraiser 2.
we do. We've got a cube. We've got a cube. We've got chains with hooks. See, folks, even though it's not a Hellraiser film, it's still got that spirit. There you go.
Yeah, you've got
Um,
these early on when Catherine goes in to Carl, what's his name? Carl Starger's mind.
yeah.
That's Vincent D'Onofrio. She sees like these boxes open up with these little dioramas of the different girls that have been
Mhm.
murdered, and that's really really creepy stuff. I also like there's sort of a 2001 Stargate sequence because of
Yep.
course when they say there's a third table in the room, but they only have two subjects, they had the third table because they used to send two investigators in. It's going to get used by probably the FBI guy.
What? Foreshadowing? What are you talking about? Well, it's going to be used by someone, and then pretty soon the FBI guy, is going to end up being on the table. So,
Well,
yeah,
I had forgotten. Here's how much I'd forgotten this movie. I was convinced that at
yeah.
the end somehow Vince Vaughn's character got kidnapped by the guy and was being held captive. I
Oh,
don't know. I
yeah.
was thinking of some totally different the movie, but was it Marianne Jean Baptiste plays one of the other doctor who's in
Right.
the institute. She's kind of behind the control panel with Dylan Baker, and at one point they realize they need to go rescue Catherine because she's convinced that the dream mind state is real, and that can really get messy, and the whole time you die in the dream, you die in real life thing. So someone's got to go in after her. I thought for sure that she was going to go in and be killed. And then Vince Vaughn would go in because this movie
Right.
doesn't have a lot of it's sort of a surrealist horror movie, but it doesn't have like a high body count really.
Mhm.
So that was, for as many movies as this reminded me of, it does a good job of subverting those tropes. Like when the FBI goes to raid Starger's house, you see him inside and you see him kind of freaking out, not because he has no idea he's about to be raided, but he's having an episode and he's out of the aspirin that calms the voices in his head. He just
Mhm.
passes out on the kitchen floor. So when the FBI breaks in, they find him just like laying there, do a full sweep of the house, and just find him, passed out in the kitchen. I thought they were going to do a Silence of the Lambs thing because they were setting up the same way, where it's like, oh,
Right.
they raided the wrong house. But yeah,
Yeah.
it was a nice touch.
Yeah, instead they play at the angle of where they set up to where they raid his head, his where he actually kills the ladies later, and oh, there's nothing there, we can't find anything, and oh wait, there's a secret door. They still play the angle of the fake facade, but it's it's later. But you're right, it's interesting that they come upon him when he's had his episode, and that actually sets, that sets things up to where he's in the comatose state, and we find out that the conditioning he has, no, yeah, he's going to be permanently like this. There's no getting out of this at all. His brain, he will be locked in here forever, which I also thought was interesting. Um, and yeah, it plays with some tropes, and then it breaks some others, or bends them, I will say. But D'Onofrio, I mean, this is a young D'Onofrio too. Yet,
Not as young as when he was in Adventures in Babysitting.
no, that's true. That's true. Not
And
that
if
young.
Howard the Duck is canon, God damn it, his Thor in Adventures in Babysitting is canon. That's an MCU film.
Well, there's a deep cut for you folks. Yes. Yes, his Thor, yeah. Whew. But
He'd been banished to Earth, and he was
Well-
hanging out as an auto mechanic. Sorry.
what's funny is when I watched this, I forgot that he plays the demon guy. I forgot D'Onofrio. He plays the bad guy in this when I watched it again, because it's been a while since I watched The Cell. And I'm like, holy crap, that is D'Onofrio. There's a lot of places though, even especially when he's Carl Starger, in real life, it's hard to see him because he's got this wig, the hair, the way it is and everything. It's kind of hard to see him because usually we're used to seeing him with shorter hair
Or
for
bald.
one.
I mean, because
Or bald. Yeah.
I mean, he was doing Men in Black 3 years before this, and now he's playing a different kind of deranged, possessed character almost.
Yeah.
But that's the thing that's so great about his performance in this, is he overcomes the fact that he essentially looks like, I can't remember which, I think it was Jeff Daniels from Dumb and
Mhm.
Dumber. I mean, that's the look that he's got,
Right.
but he's still terrifying.
He is. He's still creepy because we see what he does with one victim, and that's what I like to. We get one instance of one victim of what he does to him. We don't get a repeat of his victims like you do get in some procedurals in that, to where we get to see him do the same thing to a number of victims or whatnot. No, we see the one victim, which is disturbing enough. It's like, wow, okay, he bleaches them, then he makes them look like dolls, then he suspends himself from hooks above them, and that's how he gets off without actually touching them. It's like, wow. And then when Catherine goes into his mind, we find out a little bit of what might have, helped contribute to the way he is, which, is a little bit standard, but it is proven that can cause problems, but that was a little bit cliche.
Well, I mean, it's cliche to the point of being, I mean, I think ridiculous. I think if I
Yeah.
had one criticism, it's that they went a little bit overboard on the what makes a killer. They just
A
threw
killer,
everything at
yeah.
it. Like he came from a religious upbringing, and yet his dad beat him savagely, which shows the hypocrisy of believers. Blah blah blah. His mom wasn't his real mom; she was a prostitute that dad may have forced him, young Carl, to have sex with, or molested at a young age.
Yeah.
Carl liked to play with dolls, so his dad thinks he's gay. Like every cliche in the book
They
is this
stuffed into
guy.
one character, yeah.
You could have just taken one of those and been like,
Right.
yes, he's got a virus that messes with his brain. There was an inciting incident, and now he's crazy. But now it's just
Right.
like, it's got to mean something. Don't you see? I'm like, no, I don't see.
Yeah, they did throw everything in the kitchen sink. They pretty much took every reason you've ever read in a psych book or whatnot, and they shoved them all into one character. Uh, and yeah, I mean, that didn't bug me too much because of the time period this came out, but at the same time, I can definitely see it as a bothersome point.
It's
But
more that, I mean, the baptism thing they kind of set up early, but then there's a
right.
very clear montage where Catherine is looking, she's following the boy, and like kind of she's hiding in the like a
closet,
closet,
yeah.
or and she's
Mhm.
looking out through it, and that's when we get the montage of everything else. I'm like, "You're just putting it all out there." Like, he was molested, got beaten for playing with dolls, mom's a whore, like, all of this other stuff. I'm like, "Just parse it out a bit," because when you pile it all up, it just becomes, oddly funny.
It does, but again, they do still work some surreal elements in here, and for as much as there are the tropish things, there are the things like that. There's a lot of original stuff that they throw in here too, stuff that is a bit bold for a wide release film with star actors in it doing a number of things, especially as Catherine dives deeper into his brain a bit, and we meet the other side finally of the guy, his inner demon, if you will, which looks like a demon, which is downright scary. I mean, it's D'Onofrio in, I think, in all the roles of the different forms, and at one point when she comes across a scene to where we see Carl's first victim, where he talks about how he did it messy or whatnot, this demon shows up. And it's a downright creepy and a bit frightening scene. This thing where it knocks her down and it starts sniffing. It's just like, whoa.
Well, it's, I don't know if anyone's written a book about this, or essays.
Mhm.
I'd be really interested to see what Tarsem Singh visually did to, kind of flesh out the metaphor, the visual metaphors for what's going on in Carl Starger's mind. Because
Right.
one thing that you may have noticed is all of the personae, aside from, the little boy version of himself, which is like the glimmer of good that's trying to get out, but it's trapped in a world of monsters. All of these are very majestic, and they all have capes that are made out of something.
Mhm.
There's, I think, the first one we get is the sort of the tease where Catherine, it like growls at her, like, "What are you doing here?" That she screams and presses a little button that lets her
Yeah.
out of the dream. It shows up, and there's like all this purple fabric, these like massive, like royal curtains, and you realize, oh, those are all strapped, hooked through the hooks, the ringlets in his back. So
Yeah.
he's like essentially wearing the room as he descends this throne. It's wonderful stuff.
It's visually stunning. I mean,
Mhm.
and there's a number of scenes like that to where like I said, the cinematography and the production design and everything, they gave them some creative freedom in this, and they go they get pretty out there, but stunning visually. Yeah, the color purple and everything as he's walking, and the drapes, you realize that the cloth is connected to him, and it kind of gets pulled along as he walks, and so it reveals more. It's just wild, and we get a number of scenes like that. Like later on, when Vince Vaughn first gets into once he goes through the Stargate, and which, mad props for them. They're doing a kind of surreal film, and they minimalistically used a CG for the time. So there is some in there, but they used it just enough, and then it went away, and that was fine because it didn't distract me too much for it. But it was like, wow, that is 2000 graphics. But um, you get the scene to where then Catherine has been basically trapped by the demon who put a collar around her, just like the real Carl puts collars around his victims. And suddenly she's one of his, basically, his submissive or whatever. You want to call her, basically under his control, and she's wearing this wild outfit. You've seen it in the trailer, is linked, but Vaughn shows up, and our bad guy is now dressed up like some Victorian, like
It's very
era,
much like a pope, like a
like a
like a
pope,
papal
yeah.
outfit, yeah.
Hmm.
This big
And
golden crown and robes and stuff,
you
yeah.
know and he's still pale but weird eyes, but it's D'Onofrio, but it barely resembles D'Onofrio, but it's still scary as hell. And he puts him on this table where he's winding up his intestines. I'm like, oh my god.
It reminded me actually of another one of the Hellraiser 2022 remake,
Yeah.
with the guy that had the contraption sticking through him, that it was wound by his
Mhm.
intestines, oh, yeah. And the cool thing is there's a great payoff to that, because at the end of the film, Spoiler alert, everybody makes it out okay except for our serial killer. Um, they're going through Carl Starger's house, and Vince Vaughn's character finds this book that's got a Renaissance painting of a guy on a table with with that same contraption winding his intestines. And it's great because he's not repulsed by it. He doesn't seem to have like a horror flashback or anything. He just has that almost deja vu look on his face. Like, I don't know why this bothers me, but it really does.
Right? But again, also those little elements at the end help set up and give a reason of why you ran across those in the killer's brain, but we show it after instead of before, which is an interesting take on it. So you're just like, oh, and I like that. You don't get everything presented to you in there. So I like that approach as well. We got a number of comments here we're going to pull over
No,
real quick.
let's do it.
Here real quick with Infobomb, who said he was surprised we hadn't mentioned Dreamscape earlier, but that's why I had brought it up. Yeah, it is the labyrinth of one's mind instead of one's dreams. And then Domestic Disturbance with John Travolta. Kind of, I think it was in the same vein, but and Psycho bored you to death. Well, Psycho just made me angry. The remake with Gus Van Sant, like angry, like. And
Why did they have to show Norman Bates actually masturbating while looking through the peephole?
Exactly. Thank you. I appreciate that because his mom in his head would have never allowed him to do that.
And
That's the whole point.
And also, why did I actually need to see Anne Heche's asshole when she flopped over the tub? I mean, like, I saw it on the big screen. I'm like, that thing is as big as my head right now. No, thank you.
That's a whole nother discussion. We are not going down that rabbit hole because that will get me going, and I'm just not. And then Infobomb asked, what about Manhunter, which had Brian Cox, who was a better Lecter. Manhunter is a great movie. I think that's one that people overlook sometimes. And then there's Videodromes, but that really wasn't dreams necessarily.
Those are transmissions.
Those were transmissions, yes. And then he states, many would think Chile is overlooked, and I would gather it was underviewed for good reason. No, people would not say it was overlooked. If they do say they're overlooked, you need to check their water because it's not turkey time. Gobble gobble.
I need to. I've never seen Geely. I need
you
to.
Don't. You don't. No, you don't.
I do. I'll watch that now that I'm on a comic book movie sabbatical. I'll just catch up on the awful crap that I've been missing.
You could watch it during Thanksgiving weekend because she does mention turkey time. Gobble gobble. So, yeah, there you go. One of the best lines ever cut out of cinema. Here's Dylan Baker, pre-Kirk Connors, who is in Spider-Man comic book world, becomes the Lizard. That's true. Trying to become better. And then we've got our Facebook user, who I'm thinking it might be Will. But they say great film for The Cell. It dared to be surreal and cerebral for pop culture consumption that was no longer ready for it post indie film boom 2000, which contributed to its being underrated and largely forgotten. And the visual elements reflect the director's music video provenance, especially REM's Losing My Religion.
That makes sense.
And I agree. That's why I consider this underrated. And I think one of the reasons is people can't get past that. And this sounds bad, but it's true for many people. It has J-Lo in it. So, you just, but as we mentioned earlier, J-Lo actually puts in a decent performance. There's a solid cast around here. And it's an interesting film. It is. This is an interesting film. They don't go full sci-fi in here, but they've got the sci-fi horror angle in here, and I think it's an interesting take, and it keeps your interest because you're just like, where is it going? The first time I saw it, I'm like, where is this going? Because in the trailer, all you ever got was the surreal imagery.
Right.
In the trailers, you got her in the desert, you got her with the wicked cool mask, you got the demon guy, and all, you got all that, and then you're watching, you're like, wait, what's this about a serial killer? What? Why? Wow. Okay. When did this become, Criminal Minds?
I yeah, that's the thing. Is like it is. I mean, you don't see the pop star transition to legit actor and flourishing acting career very often. I
No.
mean, J Lo started off as a fly girl for crying out loud on In Living Color,
Right?
right?
Yeah.
And that's not to not I mean, because she was great on that show. She's a fantastic, musical artist, and
Mhm.
she's, I think, a pretty terrific actress. She's not winning any Oscars, although was it, the movie Hustlers from a couple
Yeah.
of years ago, which I
Mhm.
didn't see, but I know there was, kind of
Oh,
some kerfuffle that she didn't get nominated for the Oscars for that because people are saying she was excellent in it. But yeah,
she
I mad
was
respect for J-Lo.
she was solid in Hustlers. I mean, she does she does the rom-com, which especially the same formula rom-com, but at the same time, then she does something like Hustlers or The Cell, to which is something that you don't expect. And she does well in those roles, quite well, in fact. And oh, it was Ray Simon. Mr. Ray Simon is with us
Hey, Ray.
tonight. Thank you for tuning in, Ray. He is the one that made the comment about the REM losing my religion. I should have figured with the music reference being from Ray, but thank you for tuning in. And yeah, it is especially for 2000 because as we mentioned, horror was in a weird time. I mean, you had the resurgence a bit thanks to Scream, but then you got in around 2000 and people were like, well, what do we got to do? Something a little different, you know, and we get the Cell, which yeah, all kinds of stuff going on, especially in the imagery we get in the dream world, because you would think that it was all just grotesque stuff because he's a serial killer, but it's not always all grotesque stuff, is it?
No, I mean, there's still, kind of these flourishes of innocence because there's that childlike element to it. But, the thing that surprised me, and I'd forgotten about how this movie ended. Like I said, I thought Vince Vaughn ended
Right.
up being
Yeah.
in peril, but it doesn't end with a sequel setup, and it doesn't end with any kind of indication that anything is other than just all right. We do,
Hmm.
Catherine does go back to that to try and communicate with that comatose boy because she's learned that she can bring someone into her mind successfully. And hopefully
Hmm.
this time she won't have to kill him. Or in this instance, at the end of the film, it would be perfectly reasonable to expect, because this is a horror film, that she goes to, comfort him or console him. All of a sudden he turns into the horrible snake man and lunges out, and we cut to black as she screams. But no, it's just a rather it's ambiguous, like what happens after that, but it is kind of lovely and hopeful at the same time.
It is, and also that's one of the prime examples where this film actually, where we mentioned that it does have tropes, it kind of breaks the tropes because they allude to it. And I think they do it on purpose. They allude to it like, wow, it's really strange because we see the fallout after because what ends up happening is Catherine decides she can't work in his mind. So she brings him into her mind, which is dangerous, and she ends up defeating him in this wonderful clash. It's like I forgot about how she ends up fighting this demon, the demon of the child, the demon side. I forgot how she did that with the sword and everything. And then you discover that, yeah, as she's cutting up the demon with this sword and kicking his ass with a freaking crossbow, it just visually wonderful. Being the fantasy guy, I love this whole segment. But then she finds out, of course, that she's hurting the demon, she's hurting the little boy, and she drowns the little boy
Yeah.
consciousness, but she drowns him in the end. And
Well,
then
it's a flashback to the whole, or it ties back in the whole like
right to the
baptism
baptism
angle.
where
And
his
yeah.
dad held him down underwater, but realizing that you can't have the demon, you can't have the little boy without the demon. There, she finally reluctantly realizes this, and the demon reminds her as well. He's like, "Yeah, boy, demon, demon, boy, you can't have one without the other. Sorry." And so she goes ahead and she drowns the little boy's consciousness, mind you. Okay, consciousness, folks, but it's still visual. It's a little kid she's holding underwater. It's like, wow. Where I was
Yeah.
going with this is they cut from that to then, as we mentioned, Vince Vaughn's character in the house doing the evidence thing, and then they mention, "Wow, how has she been?" Well, okay. She did adopt his dog, and they're like, "Wow, that's really weird. That's really weird." Almost setting it up like, okay, does she have remnants of the serial killer in here? Kind of alluding to it, but that's not the case. She wanted the dog.
Oh, dude, I just thought the ultimate horror movie ending to this.
Mm,
You had that same kind of penultimate scene where
yeah.
Vince Vaughn goes out to see her. They're standing by her pickup truck. She's got the dog,
Mhm.
and then she drives off. She pulls over to a gas station or something. She gets off. She takes out her overshirt, and she's wearing a tank top. And you see the fucking loop hooks like sewn into her back, and then she continues driving away.
Woo, that just takes a completely different turn for the ending of this film. That would, but again, I liked that because it played with you. You're almost like, wait, are they alluding to that she may be having a bit of, the bad guy in her, but she's not. She likes the dog, so she wants to take care of the dog.
Yeah, the dog was helpful, and it was ultimately, innocent in this whole thing. I mean,
Right.
it was present for most of the murders we find out, or at least the
Yeah.
kidnappings or the postmortems. But it was just, it wasn't like a vicious guard dog or anything that had been trained to kill. It was just, a pet. Um,
Yeah.
the one the one thing that really annoyed me, and I had to go back and rewind this and watch to make sure that I followed the story,
Mhm.
was uh Vince Vaughn's character, Peter, has kind of a heart to heart with Catherine when
Right.
they're trying to decide if she's going to go in or go back in. And they're talking about, the nature of, good and evil and, all this stuff. Can people be saved? And he starts talking about how he used to be an attorney, and what made him, I guess, give up the profession was there was a case where a little girl had been molested. Um, the perpetrator was released, kind of Freddy Krueger style, because of a legal technicality. Nothing could be done. Then it says the next night, the girl's parents come home to find the perp is sitting on the couch watching TV. Their little daughter is sitting next to him, and she's been completely eviscerated, and her heart has been placed in the fridge because the killer thought that they would want it. Uh, I rewound this and I'm like, wait a second, something doesn't make sense here. And of course it
Mhm.
is. They specifically say little girl because the way he talks about her later is like, "Oh, maybe she was, like, 19, like, she was a
Right,
college student."
right,
No,
yeah.
specifically little girl.
Mhm.
Why are the parents coming home in the evening? There's no mention of, like, "Oh, he killed the
The
babysitter
babysitter,
too."
yeah,
And also,
yeah,
this is the day after the person who had molested her and been on trial
yeah,
and then got released. No, they're not leaving that kid alone in any capacity.
yeah, true
This
enough,
makes no
true enough.
sense. Although I did like
Uh,
the capper to that scene. It was saved because um, J Lo says something to Vince Vaughn about like, do you think that it's possible for someone to go through that much, childhood trauma and
right.
fear and rage and still come out on the other side of it? And he's like, yes, I do. I
Mhm.
know that I know it's true, which implies to me that he had kind of a messed up childhood and went the other way,
Right,
which was
right, I
really
mean,
nice. And without going into it, like, yeah, my dad beat me too. He just let it said, yes, I believe that, I believe it. I know
e
it.
even after what he experienced, he still believes that they could possibly come out on the other side, okay, and, yeah, I love that angle too, and that's giving his character at least just a little more depth rather than basic FBI profiler, and just like her character is got a little more, they allude to the owner of this project, the father of the son she's trying to get, get a breakthrough on at the beginning. Um, they allude to how he doesn't trust her. They don't exactly say why, but you get the feeling there was some event that had them kind of distrust her. Like something happened with her. They never say it, but there's like this thing hanging over her in the beginning of
Hmm.
why she's trying so hard. And I like that. They don't exactly spell it out, but you do get it that her character had something happen early in their project or whatnot, because they say they were reluctant in picking her too, They didn't necessarily want her. So, I like that they don't give you everything, but they give you enough to go, okay, that explains why she is maybe working as hard as she is because whatever happened, she's trying to prove herself because she has all the higher ups not believing in her.
Yeah.
And speaking of the boy, Infobomb dropped that he was sort of thinking of Silent Fall, where Dreyfus is a shrink who's trying to find out who murdered an autistic boy's parents.
I didn't see that one.
I have not seen that one, but that does sound interesting. And he mentions D'Onofrio's robes look like a mashup of a devil and a glam rock star with him in the robes. And yeah, that's true. And that's the whole point. I think they were going for this fantasy look, but like a modern spin of fantasy look, like Tim Curry's Darkness in Legend. They were kind of going with that, with the horns too, not nearly as big as the ones in Legend, that's for sure. And then he mentioned that he guessed that the virtual reality outfits that J-Lo dons, it seemed reminiscent of the still suits of Lynch's Dune. Yeah, they were a cross like between that and, as we mentioned earlier, Dracula's armor. And the Visions Walk-In enters in Dead Zone, in Cronenberg's best, in my opinion, have a dream quality. Infobomb like in Dead Zone. They did have a dream quality, not quite as let loose as this one. Like I said, I'm a big visual guy, as folks, if you follow the podcast, So for me, I'm just eating up all the visual, wild, surreal stuff because I'm just like, this is give me more of this, right? From the the Escher or the Geiger type stairwell when she first sees the little boy, which apparently that scene was.
You were right. The first time was Escher. Yeah.
Oh, it was Escher. I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
It was it was influenced by that. There's also a stone hallway that was influenced by a Geiger film. There's a lot of art. Apparently, looking up the trivia, there's a number of art paintings in that were influencing in the vision, the visuals of this film, and you can see it throughout here, especially the way they shoot it. And as we talk about the red armor, were reused from Bram Stoker's Dracula. Those are actually reused suits from Dracula. Yeah.
Wow.
Because apparently Aiko Ishioka's, excuse me, I may have mispronounced that, but apparently they did the visuals on Dracula. They used the suits for this. That's why they look so similar, because they actually are.
Wow.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. What I also thought was interesting was when Catherine was watching the TV before she falls asleep after the first time she crawls into when she gets out of the latest therapy session, with the boy, she's watching Fantastic Planet, which is a surreal French film, which we've covered here on the Spoiler Room. Check it out on the episode there, folks, on the archives.
One thing I noticed was Jake Weber, the actor who played the other FBI guy, not exactly Vince Vaughn's partner, but he was just like the blonde FBI fed in the room. He was the lead in Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead a few years later.
Yep.
Because I was like, where have I seen that guy before? I didn't realize until looking at IMDb, his character name in this movie was Gordon Ramsay.
Yeah, I know, right? We look at it now. We look back at it now going, oh, really? What? Yeah.
Now I want to see Gordon Ramsay playing that same agent. Like, get back in that dream.
Here, let's make an idiot sandwich. Here, give me the buns. Look, I'm making an idiot sandwich. No.
You call that psychology?
You call that psychology. Ray throws in a comment. He says, fun fact, Tarsiam Singh once directed a video for a band named Dream Warriors, according to the wiki. So there you go. Dream Warriors. Okay, that's a different band, but still, there you go. And finally, Infobomb says, maybe the film had an effect on J-Lo, as for a time she was involved with a bad boy head honcho P. Diddy, or whatever he was calling himself at that time, which she was. I mean, you travel in the same circles, it happens. Um, I when I first watched this type of film surprised me that J Lo was in this film, and just because of the type of movie it was, and the fact she was a pop icon, and you're just like, this is a rather dark film for someone in the pop culture to take on this role.
Hmm.
And not saying it in a negative way, it was just a surprise when that film first came out. And in fact, I fully admit when I first saw, oh, The Cell comes out with J Lo when it first came out in 2000, I'm like, oh, that's nice. But I did see that when I saw the trailer, I was like, well, that's interesting. And then I watched it. I'm like, I dig this film. It's one of the reasons why I picked it for this month, is because I wanted to talk about it, because um yeah, it's definitely something that took a risk. Um and for the people in it, it's always surprising.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. Like I had mentioned, I think J Lo first came onto my radar. I never saw Selena, but I knew people who
Mhm.
were really big into the actual Selena and also J Lo's performance as her. But first I saw her in Out of Sight,
Mm,
the
mhm.
Steven
Yeah.
Soderbergh movie, and I thought she was great in that. So when I saw she was going to be in this like weird trippy horror movie, that's interesting. I just didn't think much of the movie at the time, but I think that's because I expected something a lot that it was kind of like what you were saying from the trailers, expecting something other than, a police procedural with a little bit of, dream stuff in it. But now watching it, I can appreciate it much more, even though a lot of it just m- makes my
You
skin crawl.
It does make your skin crawl. It's supposed to, though. I mean, so in one hand, it's effective because it is making your skin crawl. Whether or not it's not something that you really want to voluntarily watch, but at the same time, they are eliciting an emotion from you. So in that respect, the filmmaker's successful. I've told people that before. They're like, "Wow, this movie was horrible. I couldn't. The scene I watched was just." I'm like, well, on one hand, that's a win for the filmmaker because they got a reaction out of you versus you just sitting there going, like I was with The Nun, going, how much time do I have yet on this film? Really? I mean, that film nearly put me to sleep, in all honesty. Uh, uh, but yeah, it tries to add a little bit different variance to the police procedural, and I think it uh it is successful in it, and I think it does get overlooked sometimes, unfortunately, because people see J-Lo's name and maybe are turned off by it, or just like, oh, this is going to be, when no, I mean, a lot of your stars get ample screen time. Nobody really dominates. And that's what was funny, is while I was watching this, I'm like, there's no one actor that really dominates the film over the other. They all are actually kind of balanced, which again is kind of odd considering you have pop culture, especially at that time, pop icon J Lo. She's not always in every scene. you,
No.
you know, unlike some films that have the pop icons where they're always there. You're following their character, and in here we follow a number of different characters, and I like that approach as well.
Yeah, I mean it's a nice, the Catherine Dean character is a nice, I think, contrast because she is
Mhm.
so sensitive and empathetic. She's a therapist. You can tell she works a lot with children. She really cares, but she's not weak or vulnerable. And when she does, she's very resourceful. Like when she's looking at that religious imagery before she goes into the dream that she's going to pull Carl Starger into. But when it comes down to it, she has that wonderful shift, and it doesn't feel like it came out of left field. It feels like
Mhm.
something that she was kind of holding in her back pocket because she essentially turns into Katniss Everdeen from the Hunger Games,
I love it. I loved it. That outfit and everything. Yeah.
which also annoys me. Would just rewind the tape back to a few years ago. Like, where are all the strong, empowered female action stars in movies? Like this is the first time we've ever had. I'm like, okay, just go back go back about 20 years and you'll find plenty of examples. I don't know what you've been smoking.
I don't know what they've been watching, but yeah, because which again, they establish a number of times, they don't beat you over the head, but just enough to keep you reminded, like, yeah, pulling someone into your brain is dangerous. But she pulls this guy into her brain and she freaking kicks his ass in looking in this badass outfit. Like I said, whoever was the costume designer for this film was amazing because the costumes for everybody, especially for J Lo and for D'Onofrio and his demon character, uh, all the costumes for that were just wildly visual and fitting. And you're right, it's not out of left field because she's been fighting for a while to pull someone into her world to help them. She was trying to make that case for the boy, and she does it here against the wishes of the people who are monitoring her because she has friends trying to her coworkers trying colleagues trying to monitor her vitals and that. And she just like, no, I'm pulling them into my brain. And when she does, we find out, wow, she should have did that sooner because she gets all badass. But you're right, it's not out of left field because it's something that she had been wanting to do for a while, that she felt strong enough that she could actually do. And, at the end, when we see the boy, we realize, oh, she's pulled him into her mind, but she's created a world that's similar to his, when she's trying to help him. And it all comes around, but it feels natural. It doesn't feel like, oh, great, now she's suddenly badass. No, she's actually strong throughout. And she's like, no, I want to pull someone in my world now. I can handle this. And they're like, no, you can't.
I mean, this very much could have gone in like the direction of the Matrix or something, where all of a sudden she's got like a billion guns and they're shooting in the big special effects extravaganza. But it all comes down to simple. She's got like a crossbow and then she's got a big sword. And as you
Mhm.
mentioned earlier, when she stabs the Snake Man version of Carl Starker, he starts laughing and he looks over and you see the it's just very sad that the stabbed bloody body of the little boy, and then
Mhm.
she realizes that she can't stop.
Right.
She's got to finish the job. Um, which normally in another horror movie, that moment of realization would have been just the opening that he would need to come up and overpower her, and then we have another
Right.
5-minute fight. But no, yeah, it's much more than that.
No, she has him defeated, and he realizes, he knows he's won regardless. Whether he gets back up or not, which he can't really. So that was nice to see. But he's like, yeah, you're gonna have to kill the kid too. Sorry, you're just that's the way it's gonna be. Um, you know, and it's that little extra. I mean, it's not that deep, but at the same time, it's that little extra variance that I think, if you watch enough of these the types of films that you can appreciate that they're doing something at least a little bit different. They're not completely reinventing the wheel, but they're doing just enough to where you're like, oh, okay, that was different. It feels different enough. It feels like, fresh enough to where you're watching it going, I like how this plays out. It did not play out exactly like I expected, nor does it, like you said, does it end for the Cell 2? No, it ends with her and we realize she's helping her. Never mind the fact, and we forgot to mention you mentioned it, I think, in the beginning of the synopsis, but we aren't dealing with someone who's been trained all her life or in her career to handle dreams and handle. She was a social worker, and they picked her out of the candidates because they found out that she had a sympathetic element that some other folks who had tried out for the job didn't have. Because they mentioned that in the beginning. They're like, they tried a shrink, and the shrink, all they did was analyze and regurgitate and report. They didn't really try to help, where she's a social worker who has dealt with, you know, all kinds of cases. So she has some heart, and that's why they pick her. And I again, another layer to a character that could have easily just been, oh, we've trained her for years to, prepare her brain for such and such. But that's not the case with her character.
Well, the other thing is, the movie is pretty honest, I think,
Hmm.
because it could have just been that like the whole reason they go into Carl Starker's brain is to get him to confess or reveal where this last victim is.
Right.
That never happens.
Mhm.
Vince Vaughn's character happens to see within the dream this marking, which becomes it's the logo of the company that, it's kind of convoluted, but it's the company that Starker had bought out or been
Ordered equipment, yeah.
ordered equipment from, and then
Mhm.
they closed down. So he took it and used it as part of his torture dungeon. There was like this whole property thing. But J Lo or Catherine, she had spent years working with this boy from the beginning and not had very much success in communicating with him or getting him to wake up. So when she goes into the mind of the serial killer, it's not a miraculous thing. Like, I've been kind of failing at my job. I almost got shit canned, but now it's going to work with this serial killer guy.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't. And she ultimately realizes at the end that she can't save everybody. So the overall plot of the movie is resolved in the outside world through detective work with a little bit of help from the inside, because if Vince Vaughn hadn't seen that symbol, he never would have put the pieces together in the real world.
Right.
But it's also that Catherine's story remains uncorrupted. She's not a super genius. She's not the
Mhm.
world's greatest psychologist or detective. She is, sorry to say it, just a social worker who's doing the best she can. And, she goes through an arc from beginning to end of the movie, but that arc does not include becoming the superheroine version of that
Right.
character.
Right, and let's not, look away from the fact that the final victim is not exactly like the other victims that given either. While she is terrorized, she starts, thinking things through, realizing she can't get out, and this tank that fills up with water that he has all on automation, which is another thing that he hardly ever actually visits. In fact, when we see him with his first victim of the film within the movie, she's dead. He's not there. So this is a guy who can't even do the deed himself, which is an interesting layer for him. He has to have the automation do the killing for him because he literally can't do it himself, which is another angle to your normal serial killer, which is interesting. But he's got it all automated. And so when we see this automation here and why they're racing, because they know they have about 40 hours to find this, his latest victim, would be victim, we find her this time. She doesn't actually drown. She could have, because they actually get late. Vince Vaughn's detective gets there late. The tank is full, but she figured out a way how to breathe through a pipe
And
that was
that's,
loose.
that's another reason that I'm kind of skeptical is
Yeah.
that blurred line between like thematic and exploitative. Because
Yeah.
yeah, she's up at the top of the tank with this, her lips wrapped around this giant pipe.
Okay, dude, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar,
And
you
sometimes it's a
know.
big brown dick. That's what George Carlin said.
True, true enough. True enough. I thank you though for ruining that scene. I thought it was a great scene where she used her
It's
smarts
still a
to
great scene, Mark. You just got to watch it in a different context.
a great scene where she used her smarts unlike some of the other victims and actually figured out that she could breathe through this tube. And now I have this ruined. Thank you,
Hey,
Freud.
listen, maybe the
Ian Freud. I
maybe
get
the other people, I'll take that, by the way. Maybe the other people also figured out the pipe thing, but they were in there so long. I mean, how long can you hold out like with your hands wrapped around a pipe? I mean,
that's true. True enough. But in any case, I like that they gave, her character at least some time, and it showed you that they would have been late, in all honesty,
yeah.
to rescue her if she hadn't found that method to at least stay alive a bit longer.
Plus, there's also that added psychological torture because the water
Mhm.
system would just randomly come on for a little bit and then would turn off, and she never had an idea of when it was going to come on or how full the cell would get. That's another thing that I think that's what disturbed me the most was just the idea of like being in that situation, and it's terrifying.
Well, what's also disturbing is the fact he had it automated. The automation it actually adds you might think, oh, well, that separates them. So but it actually adds a little bit of extra creep factor because regardless of what happens to him, this thing is still going to run. You know what I mean? And it's running on its own. It's not like he's sitting there with a button going, okay, I'm going to pour the water on her now or whatnot.
Right.
The machine's just doing it, and she's at the mercy of this whole automated thing he's set up, which is a little bit more creepy because you can't reason with the automated machine. It just, she can't like get into his head and say, oh, talk to him or whatever, or try to stop him from doing what he's doing. He's not even there,
Which makes me wonder, were those cameras on timers too then?
Yeah.
Because they were always recording, and if he's not showing up, there's no videotape that's gonna last 40 hours, even on extended
I
play.
I think what I think it was, and the way the videotape, because we do see some bits of the playback, I think the videotape kicked in just before and just after and stopped just after the spraying of the water.
Okay. Yeah.
Because all the clips that we saw on the CRT TV or whatever were always of the water either spraying on the victim or starting to fill the tank up. So it's not
Okay.
like all the time, but I think the timer with the spray also coincided with the timer of the cameras. And that's the way it kind of seemed, the way it played out. So, but yeah, and Infobomb also mentions that J-Lo was one of Robin Williams' teachers in Jack. So yeah, well, variety of different roles. You get what roles you can. And I like her in this role. And I like
Yeah.
the cell. I think, I think we'll wrap it up here. Your final thought with the cell, would you recommend it?
Oh, I definitely would recommend it.
Mhm.
I think now more than in 2000, and part of that is just because, to see the great ensemble cast that you have,
Mhm.
it didn't mean as much in 2000 because half the
Right.
actors weren't who they would become, and some of them have been forgotten. You're like, oh, that's right, that's that guy. And you got Dean Norris, who was on Breaking Bad forever, popping up
Mhm.
as one of the feds. So, but yeah, it's visually very pleasing, imaginative. The stuff that is involved with the police procedural, yeah, you've seen it a dozen times, but there's just enough little, as we mentioned, tweaks to make it, not completely repetitive.
And I agree. I think it's a bit underrated. Don't let it turn away just because J Lo's in it. She puts in a great performance, and this film is it's for a crime procedural thriller slash horror film, however you want to place it. It's fun. It's interesting. It's just enough different to where you'll watch it going, okay, you I didn't you don't feel like you waste your time with this because this clips along nicely too. I mean, this
Mhm.
film moves, unlike some crime procedurals, which might hit a little bit of a slow spot. This film moves.
Oh yeah.
Uh, it's moving. The things are always moving forward within it, one way or the other. And so, in general, I think it's handled well. And I think of the late '90s, early 2000s horror films, it's one you should check out. Yeah, I think it's worth your time. So there you have it, folks. The Cell. Helloween is over. Um, well, I mean, you still have your 31 days of horror. If you're doing that, you still have some time left at the time of this recording. But this is our last Halloween episode. Next month is Cinema Serpentes, where we're doing snake films, which means next week is going to be the high artistic film that was touted at Cannes as being one of the best films ever to show. It was so good they couldn't even give it the nom de plume or whatever it's called because whatever the award is,
Palm door.
Palme d'Or, whatever it is, it was so good it didn't even it couldn't even win that because that would have not been worthy enough for the film we're watching next week, which is Snakes on a Plane. That's right. So we got a whole month of asps, very dangerous movies coming up. We've got a couple more horrors of 1988 showing up, and I thought I knew what I was going to do for next month till I realized next year for a special series, but now I've got to rethink it because of some things. So stay tuned. I will come up with make up my mind soon of what we're going to do for next year for our special series. But until then, hashtag License to Shill. I give it to my friend Ian Simmons. Ian, please shill away where people can watch your stuff at.
Well, I'm Ian Simmons. I run Kicking the Seat, which you can find at kickseat.com. I'm also on YouTube, which you can find by looking up Kicking the Seat on YouTube. And I invite you to like and subscribe and all that good stuff. I'm going full out to finish out spooky season, doing one video a day. I hope I'm not jinxing myself through Halloween. And then there'll be more stuff lined up for November. We have a live stream coming up on Friday night for the 40th anniversary of Poltergeist, closing out Scarathon 2022 with the Friday Night Frights. So if you want to join in, you can come on over at 7:30 p.m. Central and hang out. We're going to be talking about Tobe Hooper's classic horror film.
You mean Steven Spielberg's classic horror film?
We will get into that.
Sorry, I couldn't help it.
I've been teasing that and ruffling feathers for the last 2 weeks, but we're going to talk about it.
I couldn't resist. I was sorry. I couldn't resist. I had to poke the bear. If you want to poke one horror bear with any horror fan, it's Spielberg or Hooper. Whose Poltergeist is it? I always love that debate. Interesting for sure. And if you're bored, and you're looking for something to do, check out specialmarkproductions.com. I got some interviews coming up this week. I got an interview possibly next week as well with some filmmakers. My acceptance speech from last week is weekend is up. If you want to really laugh at me, you can. But I appreciate all of you. I appreciate our live viewers tonight, which thank you, Infobomb. Thank you, Ray, for tuning in as we talk The Cell. Thank you to all our listeners and support on the Spoiler Room. We do this because you're listening. We do this. And I thank each and every one of you. It means a lot to me that you tune in. And it means a lot that Ian, you're here practically every week. Mad props to you for dealing with me every week. I appreciate that. And of course, we've got our other crew members as well who occasionally pop in. And thank you so much. And everybody, take care of yourself, stay safe. And now we'll just say good night, everyone.
Good night.
Dream warriors
ain't gonna dream no more.
Dream